We've now got to talk about mitigating fraud and managing risk. And your speakers will be Francesco, Piccoli, Omri, Bouton, and Michael Halepas. Please welcome them to the stage.
I see the time already starting here, so I guess we're on. Hi, everybody. You can hear me, right? Yes, it's working. Francesco here. Good to meet everybody. I think we have the hardest job today because we're your last panel probably before lunch. So we'll try to be as entertaining as possible and keep you not too long. But we were talking about like something not as fun as like other NFT projects. We're about the boring stuff, right? Fraud, risk, etc. But we'll try to be entertaining. And we can keep started with some introductions. I'll break the ice. Francesco here. I'm originally Italian, as you can tell by the name. Live in San Francisco, California. And I work at Unchain. We're a Web3 security and risk management company for, we develop software for companies who touch crypto, regulators, governments, financial institutions to, in a nutshell, prevent bad actors from doing sketchy things using the blockchain. So anti-money laundering, fraud detections, etc. And flew in last night, so still quite jet-lagged, but I'll let the rest of the guys introduce themselves as well.
Hi everyone, my name is Omri. I'm a degen, first and foremost, meaning that I participate in the industry and in the market. And the part that I'm the most fascinated about is really this culture that is growing around this technology. I'm also a lawyer. I specialize in Web3 and NFT, blockchain. My focus is really intellectual property management, so all of the licensing structure around the project, as well as, I'm dealing with the regulatory side, meaning I help clients assessing the level of regulatory risk from a financial services perspective and from a gambling perspective, which is often neglected, to be honest, that is involved with their project. And so it's quite interesting because I tend to work with clients from the get-go, from the very first stages of projects, so to design the product with compliance in mind, because that's often more cost-effective. That also tend to be just much easier when you're then launching because you don't have to go back and change everything. In addition to that, I'm also I had the pleasure to contribute to the Law Society guidance on NFTs here in the UK, and I am an advisor to NFT UK, which is the largest NFT community here. So it brings together, artists, technologists, professionals, and yeah, it's great to be here. So I look forward to the chat now.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. This is my first event at my show. My name is Michael. I was born in London. I trained as a barrister in London, the lawyer type, and qualified here in 2009. I've worked almost exclusively, 90% in criminal justice. And 2009 was a big year for this industry, but in all of my time here in the UK practicing at different courts, I never came across any digital assets, no ledgers, no seed phrases. I moved in the direction of financial crime. I worked in London, up the road there. I worked as a disclosure counsel on the Euribor case, so I got to listen to conversations that traders had and bankers had about rate fixing and other discussions they had. I moved to Jersey in the Channel Islands in August of last year, to continue focusing on financial crime prosecution, and I happen to be a crypto enthusiast. I observed the direction of what was happening with the world in February or March 2020, and I decided that one item that we should expect in the future is digital identity and so on. I recognize that there are significant crypto crime risks with this technology. I love the technology. Very happy to be here to exchange ideas. I am representing the Law Officers Department of Jersey. Lots of support from Jersey. I am the lead crypto crime prosecutor for the Attorney General. Love the Jersey Police, the Jersey regulators, Revenue Office, my economic crime and confiscation unit colleagues. have been very receptive to the message, and we have devised a police crypto crime investigation strategy out there. I am responsible for the law enforcement education and training. We have good lines of communication with the Metropolitan Police. We branch out. We have a digital assets outreach program. We visited Guernsey. We liaise with other countries. We're alive to the risks. We're on a learning curve. I'm here to learn and share some ideas.
Yeah, thank you guys. And I find this panel being particularly interesting for the fact that we kind of all have different backgrounds here, and we come in different stages of the life cycle in crypto, right? We have Omri, who advises companies before they do something with crypto. We develop software to help companies mitigate some of those risks. And then if something happens, Michael comes in the latest part of the process. So it's quite interesting because we cover the whole kind of life cycle. And I want to go into the topic specifically, right? We talk about fraud, we talk about risk, but what does it even mean? What kind of fraud are we preventing? What kind of risk are we managing? And perhaps, Omri, do you want to get us started and to kind of give us a little bit of framework? Because there's the builder's perspective, there's this consumer perspective, and then there's the government perspective as well. And, yep, over to you.
Thanks, Francesco. We can look at fraud, I think, from a legal perspective, and so look at what fraud means. But I think it's more useful to look at it from a broader perspective, meaning, behaviors that are not exactly healthy for the industry and for the consumers or for the community that is participating. So I'd say that includes, very nasty players that just steal money using, phishing tactics, or that what has always happened, basically, Web 3, 2, 1, 0, all the way back to before the internet. But then you have also other types of, let's say, fraud, or maybe let's not call them fraud, but just behaviors that I think we should discourage because they hurt our industry. Because, of course, media outlets tend to take those news, make them like just a blanket statement that this is what the NFT industry is. And then, the broader public and particularly gamers then end up hating the NFT industry. So what I'm talking about is called often, rug pulls, meaning someone is over-promising and under-delivering when it comes to project. And because of the distributed nature and especially if you look at the Ethereum ecosystem, let's say, if you look at the level of fees, gas fees are already quite expensive, meaning that when you're releasing a product, the price of the product is going to be higher by default, because if the cost of a transaction is £100, my product cannot be £10. It has to be proportionate to the transaction itself. So what happened, all of this to say, successful projects, especially when it comes to launch, tend to gather a huge amount of money. And people that participate in the industry, or even those that do not participate in the industry, might have heard about, Pixelmon, for example, a $70 million raise that then delivered very underwhelming assets. There was supposed to be a gaming ecosystem that is pretty much labeled as a rug pull. People invested, at the time the cost was 3 Ethereum, and I think it was about 12 to 15K dollars when it came to it, just to purchase the initial asset before you even got it. And then, the reveal day arrived, and it turned out to be pretty terrific, so in the bad sense of the word. So that, for example, is a type of fraud. Other type of fraud is, like we mentioned, phishing scam, for example, when participants, especially those that are less experienced, get approached by anonymous people on the internet that use, profile pictures like the one I'm using, so you don't exactly know who you're dealing with, and then they get access to the wallet of the participants, stealing all of their funds. So in terms of how to mitigate it, and we discussed it a little bit beforehand, education from the consumer side, in my opinion, is paramount, and I'm not breaking any new ground, everyone knows that. And I think this is also a good onboarding tactic, let's say, for big brands in Web 2 that want to approach Web 3, is providing an onboarding experience whereby you educate your community. From the project or company standpoint, I think what's useful, and it's often not very much considered, is to approach a more formal, to approach the space in a more formal fashion, meaning you employ people. A lot of projects employ people on an anonymous basis. You don't really know who your team is. Yes, they might have a good reputation within the industry, but when you're talking about this size of mine, like 70 million or so, we personally work with a lot of projects that are very prominent in the space. Of course, the news is not public, where it turned out that one of the community managers started to steal assets from the project, for example. And they don't even know who they're dealing with. So that's a major problem. And just establishing a culture, an ethical culture, having internal policies. So, I think project would benefit from borrowing some of the Web2 approach, let's say, within the space for the benefit of the community. But yeah, those are some of the measures, I would say.
I would echo what you've said, Omri. Education and training, but not only for consumers, for the judiciary. So the judges should know the basics of the technology and the risks if we're going to prosecute cases in court. And it goes without saying, law enforcement officers. We have a crypto crime investigation strategy in Jersey. It's all well and good, but if the officers on the beat don't know about it, if they don't know what to look out for when they, say, execute a search warrant in somebody's home address, then it's not much value. So we need law enforcement to understand what to look out for, how to from our criminal justice point of view, what items do you seize when you execute a warrant? How do you safely store a seed phrase once you've seized it? Anyone wants to know the answer to that, we can discuss that later, but these are the considerations that we have. I've been a victim of rug pulls. I think VASPs need to think very carefully about, and we had this conversation earlier, not that I promote any one provider, but I can envisage that blockchain analytics software will become the public-private standard. I've overseen crypto investigations in Jersey that do it manually, one wallet, one transaction at a time. That's no good to us. We can't perform a risk-based investigation using that. Conversely, we've tried blockchain analytics software, and it's just fantastic. And I think that will become the norm. You've got to know where the funds are coming from, if you can, who you're dealing business with, and it's not just a fraud risk, a money laundering risk. We're talking about terrorist financing as well, not just the North Korean state level or Russian paramilitary groups that have been identified, and VASP should know sanctioned wallets, of course. And in Jersey, we have the sanctions issue to look at as well. But the smaller, lower level stuff. Transaction monitoring is important. Knowing who you're dealing with. There are red flags that banks need to look out for. We want this technology to go mainstream. From the conversations I've had so far with people here today, we need good regulation. We need law enforcement to understand the risks, and there are many. However, and I say this all the time, cash is already being used by money launderers. We can investigate blockchain suspected illicit transactions in a way that we cannot do with cash. So there are some significant, substantial opportunities for law enforcement, but you've got to know what to look for, where to look, how to do it. Take it seriously.
Yeah, I also want to add a slightly different perspective there, right? Because I do think education is fundamental, not just on the consumer side of things, though, of course, on the enterprise side of things. But at the same time, like, not all the responsibilities for falling into a scam or a fraud should fall on the consumer side of things. And I'm giving a specific example. I'm sure you guys have gone on the internet, you probably have an antivirus installed on your computer, on your laptop, and when you go on a traditional Web2 website, that antivirus tells you, hey, this looks fishy, this looks scammy, be careful. You can still interact with it, but be careful, at least. There's no equivalent yet in Web3 for there's a lot of companies working on it, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. That's awesome, right? And there should be more, right? We're also working on something similar. But in a nutshell, right, there's, I'm sure you guys have been airdropped a lot of different NFTs to your wallet. And there's a case, I got a lot of friends that touched on that NFT, they clicked on that NFT, they were redirected to a fishy, scammy website. And what happened was that they connected their wallet, and those smart contracts powering those websites that were behind us, this website, they had a wallet, they call it wallet drainer, kind of code written into the smart contract. and that's easily identifiable, right? And there's a lot of companies like working on something like this. Still hasn't reached like quite the adoption that it should have, but there's a lot that companies can do to identify some of these risks. So this is kind of on the fraud side of things, but say that some of this money is then stolen, right? And you know, the funds in my wallet are drained. How do I as a company kind of like manage that risk exposure? Right? It's blockchain is global by definition. What are some of the practices that I can put in place to manage that risk by being exposed to the blockchain? And perhaps Michael, you may want to start on this.
Sure.
On this front.
Not that I'm here to give legal advice, but remember that if any VASPs, any businesses involved in trading, custodying, and so on, digital assets, if you are notified by law enforcement that it is suspected that you hold, custody, suspected proceeds of crime, potentially criminal liability might accrue to you if you, despite that, agree to transfer those funds away. So I think that's important to keep in mind. We've agreed with the guys at Blockchain Analytics is important, but KYC, CDD, you know what you're dealing with. With Jersey, we liaise with the Financial Services Commission. We are open to digital assets. We spread the message that they are not criminal per se, but at the same time, there are heightened risks, and VASPs are expected to upskill, to identify, to show evidence that they have procedures in place. And yeah, but for us, look, people should know that if Jersey is your destination, if you plan to misuse digital assets in Jersey, don't be surprised if we investigate. Similarly, drug traffickers, human traffickers, drug distributors, money launderers, if we identify that I don't suspect any of you in here, but if we identify that individual handles digital assets, again, they shouldn't be surprised if we conduct investigations. More often than not, suspects don't share their passwords with us. I mean, the people in this room will know that there are options in that event, but we will investigate, is what I think, and we're onto it. Collaboration, communication between public and private is essential, and to speed up the passage, the sharing of information is key, I think. Don't silo yourselves, don't sit on it. There are obligations to file a suspicious activity report. Yeah. Omri?
I don't have much to add to that. I would say that from the government standpoint, let's say a lawmaking standpoint, I think, of course, government can play an important role in deterring fraud, let's say, or at least incentivizing ethical behaviors. I think one of the main problems, is that when we look at crypto assets, basically any form of value recorded on the blockchain is now a crypto asset. And it's almost like saying, well, any piece of paper could potentially have a security printed on top of it. So potentially every piece of paper is a security, so you need to run KYC whenever you touch one. And I think that's a problem, because when you're looking especially at NFTs, when you're looking at the metaverse, I know that more than half of the room probably hate the term, but you're really dealing with digital items, and I think these are really important, encouraging adoption of digital assets other than, say, those used for the exchange of value, like in a currency-like fashion. I think it's important to encourage them because they represent, I believe, the next leap of humankind journey into the digital space, especially when you're looking at immersive technologies. So I think that from the government standpoint, incentivizing adoption of measures that can be implemented are not, a suicide when it comes to the industry standards right now, because, it's easy to say, well, implement KYC, but then if a project, an NFT project, implement KYC, a KYC release, they're not going to sell an asset. The only ones that try to pull it and pulled it successfully in terms of selling out, but it was a bit of a mess in other aspects, is Yuga Lab. And when I saw, Yuga Lab in partnership with Animoca releasing the other deed, implementing a KYC entry point, I thought, okay, well, this is maybe where the industry starts to shift, and that's where maybe many projects will be finally able to comply with the regulation here and sell items, implementing some KYC measure, because Yuga Lab was the only project, in my opinion, that could really absorb the backlash of requesting KYC information. It didn't work like that, and the industry is very much based still on the idea of anonymity. I think, if you take a wallet number and you start looking at just a Twitter, that air of anonymity fades away pretty quickly. But regardless, I think that the problem right now is that, like the previous panel was discussing, you need to resort to structures that, whereby you're issuing NFTs or you're providing exchange services from outside of the UK, let's say in this case. And I don't think that's desirable. I think we want to retain talent. I think we want to develop good ethical standard, locally. And I think to do that, you need to recognize that not all crypto assets are the same, and more regulation is recognizing that. That's why you start seeing, for example, within the financial promotion regime, specific reference to fungible crypto assets. Like the previous panel mentioned, if you're using a standard like ERC 1155, let's say, which is a token standard, that presents both non-fungible and fungible assets. So where exactly do you place that from a regulatory assessment perspective? But regardless of the kind of challenges that might stem from it, recognizing that there are different type of assets from an anti-money laundering perspective, and creating a framework where projects can implement these measures and mitigate most of the risk, I think would create a much better economy and a much more fraud-proof economy around NFTs. And just to finish, I think what's very interesting is that if you're looking at blockchain analytics software, I work with a few clients that have implemented this as one of the measures on release. And on average, based on my experience, drops that have between 8 and 10,000 NFTs, let's say on launch, with a blockchain analytics software, you normally identify between 4 and 6 wallets that are high risk. So if you think about it, it's a very small portion. It's, it shouldn't really result in a massive backlash from the community if, say, 5 whitelisted wallets are not able to then access the actual minting experience. And, you're preventing fraud, you're preventing access of high-risk wallet into your project. It's relatively low effort, it's all automated. So I hope that the government start to encourage more of those type of technological solutions that are easy to implement, especially when we're dealing with creatives and production studios that are not structured and do not have the internal organizational structure that is typical of a financial technology firm. If I'm a production studio that focuses on animation and wants to start distribute content and incentivize a sense of community around what I'm doing, why should I have a money laundering reporting officer? Why should I have all of these internal policies that are normally adopted by payment processor or e-money institutions? So I think an element of proportionality is important to deter fraud, and that really comes from the top down. So like you said, it's not all on the consumers, it's not even all on the companies. I think it's a big part of it is also on the government and on the lawmakers. So. Sorry, it was a bit of a rant, but I hope it...
No, you touched on great points, and I see we have 1 minute left, so we can probably jump to the final remarks, right? On my end, it's, I think there's consensus on the fact there's still like a lot of work that we all need to do, not only on the builders, but on the regulators side of things as well. There's still a lot of consensus that we need to reach. And the problem is that there's so many different things to take into considerations, right? And to mitigate from. You have like fishy smart contracts. You have, the AML portion that you need to be aware of, like the counter-financing of terrorism. You have like local jurisdictions that are, different between each other. So there's a lot to be basically still work on. And, every time I do panels like this, something new comes up, and the final thought is, okay, there's a lot of different use cases and the particular cases that we don't know how to handle still. And that's my final remark, right? There's a lot of stuff that we don't know how to handle. I don't know if you guys have any final remarks before we leave it to the next panel.
Okay.
It's okay. Thank you very much, everyone.